Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing? So today I will be taking over the Saturday tutorial, obviously because it's a long weekend and we had to give the tutor some time off. So I will be running the show today. Um, I honestly don't know how your tutor was running these tutorials with you guys, but I'm going to run it a little bit different. I'd like to run it in my own way. Just give me a second. So what I'm basically going to do is pull up a Notepad++ sheet and okay, I'm just gonna put it up. Put up a Notepad++ sheet. And you tell me what topics you'd like me to discuss. I'll add them in here as time goes. I think we'll wait for the first 5 minutes. Officially, class hasn't started yet. It starts in a minute. So as soon as you guys want me to get started, as soon as you know exactly what you want me to discuss, please put it in the chat window and I will try and discuss it in the next hour and a half. Okay. Okay, so subroutines seem to be the only topic of discussion. Um, Subroutines are still going to be taught to you. You have seen a glimpse of subroutines in the last lecture. Let me try and pull that up. We did actually discuss subroutines not in detail. Our next lecture, we're going to go into more detail, so I wouldn't worry too much about them if I were you. But because you did ask and there's no other question, I think we can go through it. Shouldn't be an issue. Let's see if I can pull up that lecture now. So basically, the principal idea behind subroutines is the repetition of code. We're trying to minimize all of the code that we're going to repeat. So if you look at putting things in the grid, for example, we're always using the same we're always using the same three numbers, right? I mean, three things, coordinates, so to speak. We always say what row, what column, and what text we want to place that information in. So I did find the lecture. So unfortunately, I'm going to need you guys to unmute your mics at some point. Sorry, just unplug my smart devices. So this is basically it, right? The student who asked about loops, the student who asked about subroutines. So you've noticed that each and every time we want to place text into the grid, we have to do this. We have to specify what row, we have to specify what column, we have to specify what text we're going to be writing into the grid. So each and every time, if I go back some more, you'll see that we do this a number of times. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to be repeating all of this code. So basically, we create a subroutine or a sub-program, so to speak, that handles that job for us. Does that make sense? Student that asked the question is CM Lekwete. Have I answered your question? The only way this tutorial, so to speak, is going to work, okay, my style of giving this tutorial anyway, is if you ask questions. So remember, this tutorial is not mandatory. You don't have to attend this tutorial, and I don't have any material to teach you in this tutorial. So I'm not going to make examples of things, or nor do I have slides for this tutorial. It's pretty much a glorified Q&A session where you ask questions. I try and answer them as best I can by giving you examples and walkthroughs and try to make sure that you understand the content. But if you don't ask any questions or answer my questions when I ask you questions back, this way of teaching is not going to work. Subroutines create like smaller programs. Precisely. So over here, so once again, if we just look at the code that I have over here, it's all of these. Oh, what happened to my laser pointer? I'm using row call text, row call text, row call text. So if I had to put it in a subroutine or a sub program that does that for me, that this is what that sub program. See, that's why I said we'll explain in the next lecture. But this is what that sub program looks like. So over here, I've got a sub program called and private sub, just like your button clicks or your form load. All of that, all of those pieces of code, or all of those blocks of code start with private sub and end with end sub. So here's a button over here, private sub, end sub. So I'm creating my own subroutine or a sub program in this case. And I'm basically putting in those three repetitive pieces of code. I have my grid.row, grid.column, grid.text. but I can't just pass it as row column text. I need to pass those coordinates as well. So I'm passing a variable called R along with the subroutine that's going to take over this R, a value called C along with the subroutine that's going to take care of my column, and a string T that's going to be my text that I'm going to place into the grid. Does that make sense? And then how to call the subprogram is just in the button you want to call the subprogram, you call it by name and you give it all the values that it requires. So in this case, because my place text IG subroutine has 3 parameters, when I call it, I say place text IG, and I give it R, I give it C, I give it T. Same thing here, call place text ID, give it R, give it C, give it T. Okay, so I hope I've answered that question because you guys are not too chatty in the chat window. I think you are allowed to unmute if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you can unmute and ask your questions. So line 8 to 9 will always be like that. 8 and 9. What do you mean by line 8 and 9 will always be like that? I'm not sure I understand that question. Are you talking about this line 8 and 9, right? Okay. What do you mean by will always be the same? Please elaborate your question. As I said, you can unmute your mic and talk. It's a little bit easier to and faster to get your point across. Are you saying anything? Because I can't hear anything on my side. In case I see someone does have their mic unmuted, but I'm not getting any audio. Okay, your mic is not working. That is fine. Try type it out. Try type out your question in full, and I'll try and answer it. Because by you just saying will it always be like that, I don't understand. Do you mean calling the subroutine will always be like that? If that's the question, then yes, every single time you call your subroutine, you're going to have to, whatever your subroutine name, whatever your subroutine is, you're going to have to call that subroutine and give it the parameters it requires. So I'm saying mine requires R, C, and T. So here's R, C, and T, R, C, and T. So at every point in time I want to place something in the grid, I need to specify R, C, and T. You also had a question about while loops. What problem do you have with while loops? Will we always have RCT? Yes, because whenever you want to place something in the grid, you need the row, you need the column, you need the text. So each time you want to place something in the grid, you need to provide row, column, and text. Not a problem. As I mentioned before, you did say while loop. So what about while loops do you want me to go through? So we have subroutines, we have, I believe, covered that. But as I said, it's going to be explained in more detail next week during the lectures. So you will have enough knowledge about it by the time your practical is due. So there was a mention of while loops. What about while loops do you not understand? Okay, with the while loops, I don't understand last week's practical because of the counters. Okay, so do you understand the fact that whenever you're using a while loop, this is what your while loop will look like. So while, and you have a condition in the while loop. So, and then you have end while. So within the while, that's where your code goes in. Okay, so your while loop is going to run for as long as your condition is true. So the idea behind this is somewhere within the code that you have inside here, you need to work towards making that condition false. So if your condition in this case is, let's say we have a variable called counter and counter is equal to 0. And we have a variable called max, for instance, max is equal to 10. And our condition is while counter is less than 10. Okay, understand that this code is going to run for as long as counter is less than 10. That means somewhere within our code, we need to get to a point where we're incrementing or making counter more to such a point that it is no longer less than 10 to stop the while loop from running. So as far as the practical is concerned, I can try and can I? Things I'm using my personal computer, not my work computer. So I don't know if I've got all my resources with me here, but I should. Uh, oh, just give me a second. I'll just download the memo quickly. I've managed to download it and just open it quickly. And the issue, then if you didn't understand it because of the counters, then it might not be the while loops you don't understand. It's more the counters you may not fully understand. But do you understand what a counter is used for? What the point of a counter is? My solution is just taking a bit longer to open. So yeah, basically if we're using the point of the counter is to just count and get to a point where my condition is no longer true. So that's why we are using, that's what we are using a counter for. So the point of a counter within a while loop is to make sure that our condition eventually becomes false in the way that we've been using them up to so far. So I've got the code open, but I don't want to bombard you with all of it. So I just want to look at a part of it that uses a counter. So did you guys try doing the bonus? The issue is the code that's in front of me right now has too many pieces of code. There is no actual So for instance, if you look over here, I have got, so I'm not using it in that way. I have got a, let me collapse this. I have got while my allowance is bigger than 0. So remember our practical was you need to have transactions for as long as your allowance is bigger than 0. While your allowance is bigger than 0, I'm going to do stuff, and then counter is counter plus 1. So counter keeps track of the number of transactions I've done so far. And then if my transaction is a withdrawal, I do certain code. Else, if my condition is a deposit, I do something else. Okay, the reason why I'm not necessarily going through that code is it's quite, if I showed you the rest of it, it's quite similar to practical 5. It's practical 5 is actually easier than practical 4. Good. Any other questions? I think we've looked at subroutines, we've looked at while loops. Can you create while loop inside of for next? Yes, you can. The conditions just need to be right, or it needs to make sense. So again, if I pull up this code, you'll see I've got a if statement within a while loop. I can have a for loop within a, I can have anything within anything, basically. It just depends if the application works. But I don't see why you would have a for next loop inside a while loop. They do pretty much the same thing. But if there is a use case where that sort of application is necessary, then by all means you can have a while counter is less than 10, some code, and then within there you can have a for max, for instance, because we do have max, for max equal 1, 10 to 20. For instance, let's say you want to increase max 10 to 20, then in there you'll have whatever code it is that you want to do for that long, and next max will follow. Okay, again, I can't think of a situation or a scenario where you would have those two like that, but there is no rule against it. So if you can think of a use case where this is applicable, then it should work. Okay, cool. Is there anything else you guys would like me to discuss? How do you disallow the user from entering more deductions after balance is less or equal to 0? By a while loop. So if this is my while balance is bigger than 0. So if I have while balance is bigger than 0, and I've got, instead of code in there, I've got make deductions for argument's sake. My while loop will run for as long as my balance is bigger than 0. But once my balance is 0, even if I press the button, nothing's going to happen. Or in this case, yeah, for as long as balance is bigger than 0. So the moment balance is equal to or less than 0, my while loop won't run. The code that's inside my while loop will not execute. Therefore, the user will not be able to make any more deductions because that while loop will no longer execute. Does that make sense? Okay. Is there anything else? Any other topic you guys would like me to go through? No, you can write it in an if statement as well. So it's not necessarily something that can only be done in a while loop. You can have if balance is if balance is bigger than 0, for argument's sake, then make make deductions. Then in this case, I can have a else. No, I don't need an else and if. So when I press the button, the difference between a while loop is I only have to press the button once. Here I'll have to press the button multiple times, and every time to check if my balance is bigger than 0. But once again, just like the while loop, the if statement, if my balance is not bigger than 0, this make deductions code that's in here will not execute. Dynamic array, what problem do you have with dynamic array? With dynamic arrays? Can't you use read only? You can, but read only doesn't necessarily. You can use read only within the make deductions or give it an else portion. That's not really a problem. You can definitely use read only. MM Sibui, you said dynamic arrays. Again, please do not feel free to unmute your mics when you ask questions. Okay, a person left. So when you say can't you use read only, you mean by restricting the user. You can't do that. It's not a requirement. You can't do that. That's more things like read only and things like enabling and disabling certain buttons is stuff that happens in the front end. So it's not necessarily required, but it makes life a little bit easier. That's for sure. But whenever things that we give marks to are in code. So you'd have to code that out. You'd have to, in code, find a way to stop the user from making deductions in the code. And in the front end, you can enable and disable things. That's not a problem. But the code itself needs to stop. You can't just say, when balance gets to 0, make the text box read only, because that's stopping it in the front end, but not in the back end. You need to make provisions in the code as well. With the UJ grid, are we going to have a grid only, or are we going to include 2 buttons, e.g. initial allowance, and one for transaction they'll appear automatically? So one of the reasons I wanted to actually open the memo is I have uploaded the memo to Eve, but not the code. I've uploaded the executable. So let me run the executable quickly and show you what my understanding of what the question practical 4 should have been. But I can't necessarily tell you if you have the UJ grid only or if you have how many buttons to have. Remember, the whole thing about this week that we're talking about besides the grid is modularity. So you need to make sure that your button does one thing. So you should have a button for initialization, for instance, have a button for the calculation of the transactions, have a button, each button should do one thing. So for argument's sake, here is the solution, my understanding of the solution. If I click on initialize, it says, how much is your monthly allowance? Let's say 2,500 is how much this person gets. So from there, my initialization button is disabled. You don't have to do that. I just, again, this is something that's just happening on the front end and you can't get marks for that. But if I click on transact, now see, initialize is in one button. Now I have transact in another button. I have reset in another button. I have depletion deposit in another button. So if I transact, it says, do you want to withdraw or deposit? I want to withdraw. How much do you want to withdraw? I'm going to use 500 Rand. Okay, so it says you've withdrawn 500 Rand. What you have left is 2,000 Rand. What types of transaction do you want to do? Let me say my cousin, for instance, sends me money, so I want to deposit. and I'm going to deposit 200 Rand. So from there, I've got money out 500 that I spent earlier. Now I've got money in 200. My remaining balance is 2,200. And now I want to withdraw. Say maybe I'm buying groceries, 1,500. And it says your balance remaining is 700. Withdraw again. Maybe I'm having lunch with a friend, 250. Now I'm down to 450. Let me just move this out of the way. And another withdrawal. And for some reason, 400. And then now we get to that point where because the remaining balance is only 550 Rand now, that this process hasn't ended. It says you are running low of funds, your balance is 50 Rand. And once I click on that, then that's where it says your current balance is 50 Rand. And it asks me, do I want to withdraw? Do I want to deposit? Let's say for argument's sake, I want to do a withdrawal again. And I'm going to withdraw 100 Rand. So I'm withdrawing 100 Rand. I have no more money to spend, right? But my balance is minus 50 Rand. So now it says you have no more money to spend. Please deposit some money. You notice that at this point, if I click on transact, it says you have no more money. So I can't transact anymore because my balance is negative. And this is what I was talking about, saying you need to stop the user. So right now, because my balance is less than or equal to 50, to zero, I can't transact anymore. The only things I can do is depletion deposit. So this is only gets activated once my balance is less than or equal to zero. So depletion deposit, this is where maybe I go to an uncle or someone during the month and say, you know what, I'm out of money. Could you please boost me with some money? And they send me, let's say, 500 Rand. So once I get that, now my remaining balance is 450. I can't do depletion deposit anymore because I've got a positive balance. What I can now do is transact. So I'm transacting. I spent withdrawal 200 Rand for argument's sake, and withdrawal again, another 200 Rand. And now I'm left with 50 Rand. Withdrawal again, 50 Rand. And I have no more money to spend. My remaining balance is zero. That's what I did this month. If I click on reset, everything else should be reset to normal. That's my understanding of the thing. So that's why I'm saying when it comes to telling you how many buttons, I can't necessarily tell you how many buttons you need. It depends on how many events and actions you have. So ideally, each event should have its own button, which is why each event should have its own which is why each event should have its own action. I hope I have managed to answer your question. Next question is, can you please explain how the UJ grid works? So the UJ grid works like, have you ever played a game called Battleships? NP Sono, have you ever played Battleships? No, okay. So Battleships is a game where you and your opponent have a board in front of you guys and you place little boats on a grid. And in order to shoot, and the whole point of the game is to shoot all of your opponent's little boats out of the water. So the water would be the grid in this case. So as they are putting those little ships on the grid, you can't see their grid and they can't see yours. So basically, it's a guessing game. So I'm going to guess that your battleship at A1, for instance. So that's a coordinate on the grid. And if I do get to A1, then if there is something there, then I sink it. If there's nothing there, then I can't sink it because there's nothing there. So it's your turn. Battleship board. Just give me a second. I'm just trying to get a So this is what the board typically looks like, right? We're looking at the image over here. So can you see we've got A all the way till J, and we've got 1 all the way till 10. So this is my board for argument's sake. I've got a battleship there, I've got a battleship here, I've got a battleship here, I've got a battleship there. This is the mothership. So what if this one is sunk, even though these are still there, the game is over. So what you need to do is, without seeing this, you see yours. Without seeing this, you go, I am going to shoot at A1. So A1 would be over here. Shoot over here, there's nothing there. So maybe we say we're going to shoot at 4E. If I shoot over here 4E, it's a direct hit. I get to shoot again. Do you get the gist of the game? Okay, and peace or not, do you get the gist of the game? Okay, so how do I pick where to shoot? What is the criteria? How do I pick where on the enemy's board to shoot? Answers, ladies and gentlemen. The only way this tutorial is going to go smoothly is if you answer my question. What determines where I am going to shoot on that grid that's in front of you there? You don't get the grid I just explained, but you can see the grid, right? You can see this image. Let's see if it's still opens. I don't know how to play. I just want the grid. Okay, so let's look at this one. You choose the rows and columns, right? Yes. So I need to say I'm going to shoot at A1. So A1 would be this column, 1 would be this row. So A1 would be over there. If I said B2, B2 would be over there. C3 would be over there. C4 would be over there. Okay, the column number and the row number. Yes. So once I know the column number and the row number, I know where to shoot. The UJ grid works the same way. So in order to put information into the UJ grid, you need to know, let's say grid, I'll just call it GRD, grd.row. I need to know grd.col. I need to know grd.text. Those are the 3 things that I need to know in order to put information into the grid. I need to know which row I'm going to put this information in, which column I'm going to put this information in, and what that information is. And so to put it in 0, 0, I could say row is equal to 0, column is equal to 0, text is equal to hello. Then basically these 3 lines of code are going to go to my grid in row 0 and my grid in column 0 and put the text hello in that space. Does that make sense? Okay, and that's pretty much how the grid works. And in order for you to resize the grid, for example, like when I was running the memo for practical 4, resizing the grid, you just need the grid dot, instead of row, it's rows equal to num equal to counter plus 2, counter plus 1, or whatever, and column. So whatever, how many ever rows you need, it's rows instead of just row, and the number next to it, it will resize the grid to that number of rows or that number of columns. So typically I've noticed students have an issue determining how many rows they need. Usually it comes down to the question. So if you look at our example code that we are working with in class right now, where we want to add up numbers and get the sum, it's going to be counter plus 2. In that plus 2, the first number we need after counter is for the labeling of the grid, like on top where it says value and number. The second row we need is a row to put in the sum. So that's why it's plus 2. In other instances, if you think about it now, in practical 5, you have to show the total, you have to show the remaining balance, I mean, and then you have to show the average. So that means it's going to be counter plus 3, and that plus 3 would be 1 for the labels, 1 for the remaining balance, and 1 for the average. So I can't necessarily tell you how many rows you're going to need, because that's solely dependent on the question that you're trying to answer. Does that make sense? There was another question there that says dynamic arrays. So what would you like to know about dynamic arrays? What exactly is it that you're struggling with dynamic arrays? So we need to ask the user the number of transactions than in this instance. It depends on the question, but the question doesn't ask you to ask them the number of transactions. So again, if I run this, you'll notice I'm not asking the user how many transactions. I'm asking them how much they have. They have 100 Rand. I'm going to run this for as long as this remaining balance is bigger than 0. So they can transact for as long as they have a positive amount of money. So 1 and 10, 1, deduct 20, 1, deduct 30, and I'm left with 40 Rand. 1, deduct 40. I'm left with 0, no more money. So in this case, I've only done 4 transactions, but I could have done 10, I could have done 15, I could have done, for as long as I have a positive bank balance, I should be allowed to transact. So you're not going to ask them how many transactions, but for practical 5, it's a fixed array. So if you read the question properly, you'll see that the last sentence on top in the problem part says the user wants to use the program for a month. So they want to track how much money they've spent in a month, but they only want to log the transactions at the end of each week. So a month has 4 weeks, so that means they're going to have a total of 4 transactions. That's if we're assuming that a month has 4 weeks, which typically does. Okay, so let's go back to the it's gone now. Let's go back to the question about dynamic arrays. Like, just saying how do dynamic arrays work is not enough for me to go on, because I'm not going to explain the whole dynamic array. There needs to be a part of the dynamic array that you don't understand. We honestly don't have enough time to answer, to go through entire course content. So if it's just you don't understand how dynamic arrays work in general, then you need to look at the lecture videos that for last week's lecture videos and last week's tutorials, because these concepts are explained in detail in those videos. So the point of this tutorial is, if you've watched those videos and there's something in there that you just haven't grasped yet, and then I can explain that one concept, but I can't explain an entire thing. Dynamic arrays is just too broad of a topic for me to cover in the remaining time. So if you say, for argument's sake, I don't understand how to resize a dynamic array, I don't understand how to get information into a dynamic array or how to get information out, then that is fine-grained enough for me to try and answer in the time we have remaining. Okay, while I wait for that information, is there anything else? Is there anything else anyone wants to know? Exactly that, sir. I said a lot of things. I said, what don't you understand? So by saying exactly that, I mentioned a few things about dynamic arrays. So what part of it don't you understand? Or which part of it do you have an issue with? As I said, it's easier if you unmute your mic and just ask the question as opposed to typing it out, because it's a bit quicker that way. And I generally find it's easier to understand students when they voice their concerns as opposed to writing them.
Okay, so I like the last part, the part where you like, how do you like put variables into it? I really can't remember how you said it, but the last part is the report second.
How do you put information into a grid, into a array? Is that what you
Something
have an
about that.
issue with?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you put information into a variable? So I'm asking you, MMCBE, how do you put information into a variable? So if I have a variable, for argument's sake, if I have a variable called how do I put information inside username? MMCBE, how do I put information inside username? How would I get my name inside username? Are you still with me? Text box, okay. By asking the user to enter the name, yes. So typically it would be something along the lines of text box, input box, whatever it is, but you'll have user name is equal to text box dot text, one of the ways. We can have username is equal to input box. We can have username is equal to Bob, right? All three of those are essentially me assigning a value to username. Do we all agree with that? Do you agree with that? All three of those can suffice. They can be seen as giving a value to username. Okay, so if username was a array of size 1, how would I put my information in username? I would have to specify the array, which is username still, but I'd have to say where in username, because username ideally stores more than one value. So in this case, because then I'd say username at 1 equal to my text box. Username at 1 is equal to my input box, or username at 1 is equal to Bob. Everyone's still okay with that? I'm populating the array, it only has one element. It kind of defeats the purpose of an array, but bear with me. Is everyone comfortable with what's on the screen right now? Okay, so how would this change if I now have 10 spaces of username. Now, if I have 10 spaces, I can't just say, if I say username at 1, the only one I'm populating is the first one. But now I need to populate all 10 of them. So if I have to populate all 10 of them, this is where a new variable needs to be included, integer, counter. Okay, so in this case, we can handle this multiple ways. The first thing is a while loop. So I can say while counter is less than 10, first I'd need to say counter is equal to 0. So while counter is less than 10, I need to assign username, but instead of 1, I'm going to say counter. In this case, counter is going to start at 0. So first thing I should do is counter is equal to counter plus 1. So in this case, counter is 1. So the first space will be given the first text box. Actually, text boxes don't work with while loops. So I'm just going to copy that and put it there. And we have end while. So in this case, I'm going to have counter as 1, and then counter as 2, counter as 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way till 10. So all of those, so my username array will be filled up all the way from 1 to 10. Does that make sense? Okay, the student who asked the question about arrays, have I answered your question? Okay, they seem to have left us. I'll get it back. Have I answered your question? Okay, cool. Are there any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? So you see when you were pressing the transaction button and the message question came up one after the other, did you list them all under one message box or is it quotation marks? It's all under one message box. So what you can do with that is there is something called VB new line. So you can just say one message and VB new line. It will give you a new line in the message. E.g. withdrawal 1 or withdrawal 2. Yeah, so the code is, we haven't taught you this yet, but we will teach you. But yeah, I'm saying what transaction type is this question mark, and then I have VB new line. So Visual Studio will create a new line where I have 1 withdrawal, VB new line, 2 deposit. But that's something you don't need to worry too much about. Next, how much and etc. How do you do that? Yeah, okay, that's basically that. Isn't supposed to be while counter is less than. Yes, sorry, that's my bad. This not while counter is bigger, while counter is less than. But yeah, a good thing that wasn't the point of the whole exercise. But yes, you did. I did make a blunder there thinking that up. Okay, so I don't think there are any more pressing questions. So if I have answered your questions, please feel free to disconnect. If you do stay, I'm going to assume you have questions to ask. So please do ask the questions. We still do have time available to us. But as I said, I'm not going to re-lecture you guys because if it's just a whole topic, then you're better off watching the recordings. The point of this tutorial is those little things that you still struggle with, that's what we do in this class. So I'll still be here until there's no more people in here. But yes, please do feel free to ask me questions if you have any, or point out issues that you may have. You are very welcome. But actually, I should have said you don't need to thank me. I am contractually obligated to lecture you. Okay, that's everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are watching this as a recording, you would have noticed that it's not really useful for you to watch this as a recording. It's better for you to attend the class. That way you can ask your specific question, and myself or the Saturday tutor will address that specifically. So it's once again a Q&A session, and won't really assist anyone who's watching it as a recording. So we do encourage you guys to attend these classes, and hopefully it will make your understanding of the course a little bit better. But yes, until next time, please do enjoy the rest of your weekend and stay safe. Goodbye.